Well, welcome to Dairy Livestream, brought to you by Horde's Dairyman. I'm your host, Corey Geiger, managing editor of Horde's Dairyman. We're broadcasting from our cheese cave in our studio in downtown Fort Atkinson at the historic W.D. Horde & Sons building. We have a thought-provoking episode planned for this week. Can dairy do better in schools? That's the question we're going to be talking about, but we're going to talk about nutrition and getting dairy products into the hands of consumers here as well. Today's guests have decades of experience either in the dairy industry, working with school children, or even helping people meet their nutritional needs. As we open this discussion, let's welcome Andy Novakovic to the conversation. Andy, when it comes to dairy in the diets of school children, solving the issues and the crisis, even what some people might say, isn't that simple. You served on the school lunch task force created by Commissioner Richard Ball, who heads up the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. What did you learn on that journey? And help us, Andy, today to frame today's conversation.
Well, of course, in the industry, we've been talking about school milk and concerned about it and realize its importance for a long, long time. But even for a guy who's been at this for 40 years, it was a very eye-opening experience. We had people who were involved from departments of education, from the processing level. Certainly, there were producers involved, our local promotion organization. And so it really put together a broad perspective of what's, in some ways, a kind of a complex issue. Just a couple of quick teasers. Of course, fluid milk sales have been declining. They've been kind of falling off the table since about 2010. Sales to schools are currently running about 7%, but the share of sales has also been slightly declining as well. So we're getting a smaller share of a declining base, and of course that's concerning. That's not because we've got fewer kids in school. We've got more kids going in school. That trend has been slowly going upwards. Schools, which are the ones that are buying milk for their kids, have a couple of government authorities they have to pay attention to. They need federal subsidies to afford to feed their students. A lot of students in a lot of schools qualify for subsidized meals. And so schools have to play by two rule books. One that says this is what you need to do to qualify for federal subsidies, but also a local authority that says this is how much money you've got to spend on schools, not just school meals, but schools in general. And it puts them in a tough spot. Processors, I think, understand that selling milk to schools, feeding school children, is not the same as just selling to McDonald's or 7-Eleven, but they have to run profitable businesses. And the fact of the matter is serving schools with little containers of milk is an expensive proposition. These are costly accounts to serve. And then lastly, kids. Kids are the customers. Kids are the ones drinking this product. And I think one of our challenges is to recognize somebody else is buying something under some other rule book for an ultimate customer that we want to be excited about our product. And so that's yet another part of this puzzle that we have to work with.
Thank you, Andy. And I think that is really good framing. Kids are the customers here in this whole story here. And sometimes all of us adults forget that. We really do. We're going to start with a poll question as a way to dig deeper into today's discussion. And Jim will put that on the screen here. The question is, what percent of 9 to 13-year-olds fall below the daily recommended intake of dairy? 19%, 39%, 59%, 79%, or 99%. The correct answer will come to us from the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee that's been that serves at the discretion of USDA and the Health and Human Services. So go ahead, audience, and answer that. I know some people are watching on their computers and others treat this as a podcast and so only hear audio. I think we got a good sampling there, Jim. So let's go to the results here. 37% of you got the answer right, and the answer is D. 79% fall below the daily recommended intake of dairy. That's quite alarming, and that's why we're having this conversation. So let's welcome Yvonne Greer of Why Eat Right to our Dairy Livestream program. Yvonne spent 22 years working for Milwaukee Health Department here in Wisconsin, and then started her private business, Why Eat Right. For Greer, food and health is top of mind as her business motto is eating your way to a healthy life. Yvonne is a registered dietitian, and I first heard her share insights at a dairy economist meeting a number of years ago that was put on and led by Andy Nabokov and Mark Stevenson. As a registered dietitian, Yvonne, you have firsthand experience as to the importance of dairy foods and the school food program to help deliver nutrients to students. Yvonne, what are we doing well, and what could we do better?
Okay. Well, thank you for having me today. And I'm going to answer those questions. I just wanted to bring in one thing that kind of set the stage to my love of milk. And when I was growing up, we had a milkman that came around. And believe it or not, he delivered 2 gallons on Monday, a gallon on Wednesday, 2 gallons on Friday, and by Sunday evening, we were out of milk. My mother was raising 4 children. Milk was the priority. I wanted to set the stage that things have changed. And the dairy industry, I think, has done some great jobs at, looking at the different varieties that are called for, from the different levels of fat in the milk to flavored milks to things like your zero fat yogurts and Greek yogurts. Things have changed. But one thing also that has changed is sometimes the cost of milk, which has went up over time, and people who are food insecure, who are having hard times of purchasing milk for many different reasons. One innovation that I thought I had to bring up is the shelf-stable milk. I thought that was very, very important. It's included in some of the stock box for the seniors, but it also is included in the food pantries. I sit on the board of Freedom's Community Ministries, and it's a food pantry that like a network of food pantries. We run 4 different sites, and we do use the shelf-stable milk. I also was able to get on good authority, which was my mother, that she said that she has tried the shelf milk, and it's really, really good. She just wanted me to know that it's really, really good. And so, that really innovation has met the needs of some of the food pantries. Now that COVID is in play, there's some issues around the idea that so many people have lost jobs. And schools are now shut down. So that even though the amount of milk that people were drinking, that has changed somewhat. And so the shelf-stable milks may meet a very important need, but also looking at getting the milk from the farmer to the consumer. So those were things that has been done very well, along with some of the innovations in nutrition education. And I know that we'll be having Tammy talk on that in the future. But I wanted to say, when it looked at what could be done better, when you see the number and the level of milk that has went down, and you heard my story of how we consume so much milk in the home, and then we still went to school and drank milk, but we also drank so much milk at home. The priority of selecting milk, I think that maybe with the dairy industry can really look at how are you marketing to parents, because I know that children are the main ones. We want to drink the milk, and we want to make sure children are growing. And in the schools, I think that, policies have made it where milk is available to drink, but the priority is being set by the parents. Sometimes the role modeling that's being done in the home. Sometimes when it comes to who has to purchase the milk in the home, and just think now that they're not in school all the time, if they're not going and picking up the milk that's provided, because schools have done well at continue to provide meals to children even during COVID. It's just sometimes transportation and other issues prevent parents from going to the schools. And so those still, the children that are at home, they still need to be drinking the milk. But the parents have to set that as a priority. Even in low-income families, that priority, that because of the cost of milk, might be different. However, the good thing for parents of low income is that if they get on SNAP, they can purchase the milk through SNAP. If they're on WIC, they're going to get milk. But it's really hard when you have the working poor. Some people who just don't qualify, those people are left out. And I would want to say that when I looked at the nutritional value and how you can, market the milk to parents, is that the milk is good for children and important for growth and development, but also it's good for the health and well-being of the parents as well. When you start looking at high blood pressure and heart disease, and the importance that you have with the potassium and the calcium and the nutrients that milk is providing. If you look at things like having a healthy GI system and the importance of your prebiotics that yogurts and things can give, I always say that the milk is good from birth all the way until senior. So one of the other things that I have noticed is that there has been so many other competing products out there. So if you could market and really tell the story of milk, tell the story of how important it is to health. Also, the idea that there is, I don't want to say a conspiracy against milk, but that there are people who are saying that the wholesomeness of milk is not there. And I think that's very wrong because, knowing that when I was young, we actually went to the farmers and actually bought milk directly from the farmers, and how the farmers care so much for their animals. I do not think that it's kind of fair, but there is people who are really saying that milk is not safe, that it's, adulterated and that type of thing. So the marketing campaign that I talked about with to parents, to consumers, and children are going to drink what the parents tell them. When we were coming up, there was no way you're going to drink anything but milk. Milk needs to be now looked at as the beverage of choice, not just soy, not just some of the other items that's out there. So telling a story, a milk story from farm to table would be what I would recommend.
Thank you, Yvonne. So let's go to our next poll question. And as I was listening to Yvonne, as I predicted, the questions are coming in very fast here. So that is a good thing. Go ahead and type those questions in. And here is our next poll question. How many adolescents ages 10 to 19, and we're talking young women here, underconsume dairy on a daily basis? 1 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 5 and 10, 7 and 10, or 9 and 10? And again, this is going to be based on the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. So we'll go ahead and see how the audience takes that poll here. And the answers are trending close to right, but let's go ahead when Jim feels comfortable and cut that off. Yeah, and 25% of you got the answer correct. It is 9 out of 10 young adolescent females ages 10 to 19 underconsume dairy. So that is alarming. And another reason we're having this conversation today. Our next guest is Tammy Anderson Weiss, and she joins us from California. For the past 22 years, she has headed up the Dairy Council of California. As CEO, she is the leader of perhaps the nation's most dynamic in-school initiatives to promote healthy eating and dairy's important role in diets. On 2 occasions, I personally was able to visit schools via the Dairy Council of California's mobile dairy classroom, where dairy comes to life. Tammy, tell us a little bit more about how learning becomes fun with the mobile dairy classroom and the important follow-up work done by the council's dietitians. Tammy?
Yes, thank you, Corey, and thank you, Yvonne, for setting the stage for me today. So for over a century, Dairy Council of California has been supported by our dairy farmers and processors here in the state to give back to communities through nutrition education and technical assistance. We're proud to be part of the dairy community, partnering with health professionals, food service in schools, education professionals to teach healthy eating and to elevate the health of children and families. And most importantly, we believe that milk and dairy foods are vital for healthy eating patterns. So our mobile dairy classroom is one of our flagship programs here at Dairy Council, and it's really the original farm to school program. So it's a livestock trailer that takes a cow and calf out to schools and provides free assemblies to those schools. And it may very well be the first opportunity that some children have to see a cow and possibly a calf in person. It's really a live learning lab that teaches students ag and food literacy and really helps students experience agriculture up close, providing many of them with their education and maybe their first exposure as to why milk and dairy foods are healthy. During COVID, and now as we start the new school year, virtually here in California, our 6 mobile dairy classroom units will continue to be virtual as well. We have partnered with California Milk Advisory Board here in California and some of our dairy farmers to provide a virtual farm tour. So kids get to see an actual dairy farmer on his farm and learn about how cows are milked, cow care. And then they toggle back to our mobile dairy classroom instructor and assembly to learn about the important health benefits of milk and dairy foods and what that provides to them to grow strong, to be healthy and ready to learn. So we then offer educators and families nutrition education resources that complement and help continue the learning process. These can be found on our newly launched website, healthyeating.org. What is also important to recognize on behalf of the dairy industry's support to schools are the 10 Dairy Council of California community nutrition advisors that are working throughout our state to provide technical assistance to schools. So they not only work to incorporate the mobile dairy classroom and those fun learning experiences into schools, they also provide technical advising to empower educators to teach nutrition education in the classroom and now virtually. One of the unique roles that they fill is helping schools with the Smarter Lunchroom movement, which is helping to make foods and beverages like milk the easy, healthy choice for students. We also have 11 registered dietitian nutritionists on staff here who translate nutrition science for our dairy industry, for stakeholders, and also for educators. They're really our food systems experts that develop and implement food access strategies, including access to school meal programs, especially during COVID and during the school closures. What I think is noteworthy to share today is that in California, we're experiencing with COVID a number of school feeding sites that have requested waivers, especially for milk. So they're actually requesting to not have to serve milk. And the main reason cited for this is the food chain supply disruptions. Refrigeration is also a barrier to serving milk. So we're beginning to address this by developing a milk cooler bag program, again, in partnership with California Milk Advisory Board. But this won't completely solve the problem. So as you can see, dairy is doing great in schools, and we're continuously looking for innovative ways for dairy to do even better in schools and beyond.
Thank you, Tammy. And one of the things that we addressed in dress rehearsal yesterday when we talked about this is refrigeration. Dairy, and especially milk, requires refrigeration. And Yvonne, we talked about that as well, the Hunger Task Force in Milwaukee. Sometimes some of the most important thing is not getting the milk there. It's making sure in this COVID pivot, do we have refrigeration? And Tammy, I want to thank you and the council for their work. For audience members here, it's really important to note 12% of America's population, 12%, is in the state of California. That's 39.5 million people. out of a US population of 328 million. Sometimes the rest of us in the country forget about that. We're going to do one more poll question here, and before we turn it back to Andy, what are the major nutrients of concern when people underconsume dairy? Click the one of the answers here: calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D, all of the above, or none of the above. So go ahead and answer that question there. And I think by the way this Dairy live stream is trending here, you probably will have a great anticipation of the correct answer. And right now we'll go ahead and cut that off. 84%, 83% it just changed to as we cut it off. Say all of the above, and that is indeed right. Calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin D. Those are the things that young people, as they transition to adulthood, need for healthy, strong skeletal system and strong teeth. And that's why we're talking about that. There's not many other foods in the daily consumption that deliver that. And Andy, as part of the school lunch task force created by Commissioner Bell, a number of dairy processors were in those discussions as well. Please share some of their perspective as to the logistics and the hurdles to get these products in the hands of school children, and to remember that kids are the customer.
Yes, indeed. And let me build on a couple of those themes. You know, from a processor perspective, you want to know how big is your market. You know, how many customers might be out there. You want to know what it costs to serve that market. You're interested in what the demand is. And demand is partly quantity, but demand is also price. How much is your customer willing to pay? So let's look at a few of the facts that we can bring to the table to understand this market environment. School population, by which I mean primary and secondary schools, increased pretty substantially between 1990 and 2010. But since 2010, it's been kind of flat, a really slow growth rate. And in fact, if we look forward, I think our expectation should be that the school population nationally is going to continue to be kind of flat. What we saw before reflected kind of a millennial bulge, which is over now. Smaller version of the baby boomer bulge that I was a part of. So that market, if you will, is not growing. The tailwind behind the dairy industry in that regard is slowing down. Fluid milk sales in total, as we've mentioned, have declined. They've really kind of fallen off the table since 2010, 2011. Declining each year by 1% to 3%, cumulatively about 12%. And the share market that schools are reflecting is down. So this is the market environment. It's how much can I sell? What is my market opportunity? Also, you know, there's this demand thing about how much do I want and so on. And I think we need to understand that there is a role here with respect to dietary guidelines and school lunch requirements. The dietary guidelines, which are periodically revisited, and there's a very deliberate process, very science-based process for trying to look at this, and there's 2 different kind of panels that review this, and then ultimately the regulators make a choice. In that environment, we have seen a lot of pressure to examine the role of fat in the diet, sugar, sodium, and so on. And in responding to the dietary guidelines that were relatively new at 2010, we made some changes. USDA made some changes, and that's when we got skim milk and 1% for white, skim milk for chocolate. And so from that 2011 point, yeah, we saw some differences. But I think we also need to recognize that a lot of school districts were making choices in that direction as far back as 2008. So this isn't entirely USDA school lunch program requirement driven. This is also reflecting some changes in consumer attitudes, much as Yvonne was saying. These are people expressing choices in their school district meetings and so on, not entirely top down. The changes in the dietary guidelines that we're looking at now, part of this same very deliberate scientific process, I think are giving some really good news for the dairy industry, but we also need to recognize that any of these sorts of changes involve a certain amount of social will, what society believes, and also a little bit of inertia in making changes to what we believe. For example, back in the 1980s, when this really got started, there were observations made that people who had diets that were high in fat, high in cholesterol, tended to have higher incidence of cardiovascular disease. The dairy industry, the meat industry, the poultry industry stepped back and said, well, okay, maybe, I guess, but that doesn't mean we caused it. And so for the last 40 years, a lot of research has been done to try to untangle what happens when I eat a diet that's high in cholesterol, high in saturated fat. Is there evidence that shows this is causing cardiovascular disease, or is it just some kind of correlate? Well, we've learned a lot. And for example, we've learned that eating eggs isn't going to give you a heart attack. We've learned that saturated fat is high in calories compared to protein or carbohydrate. And you might have a problem with obesity, but the linkage between that and having a heart attack is not particularly strong. However, you got 40 years of dietitians and nutritionists who have been taught something quite different. And to just say, oh, well, I read this journal article, it's all good now, that's not so easy. And so even with the scientific community, this is still something we need to continue to work on and to continue to build the case. Never mind young moms, middle-aged moms who want to do right by their kids and are now like, okay, was everything I told before not quite correct? Working on that is that really a processor responsibility? It certainly complicates their life. And I think we have to recognize that all of us are currently kind of debating how much is what I'm going to do based on my beliefs versus how much am I going to do based on facts. And we all have our versions of that. And we have to recognize that this is part of what's happening in terms of the milks that people are choosing. I sometimes say that when we start talking about marketing and changing beliefs and attitudes, it's a lot more about psychology than it is about biology. The marketplace. As I mentioned, schools buy milk in part because they have to serve milk in order to get federal reimbursements. Give me a list, Corey, on your next poll about how many other products school lunches have to buy in order to qualify for a reimbursement. If you don't put milk on the tray, you don't get a reimbursement. That doesn't mean the kids drink it. And I think that's where people like Yvonne and Tammy start to come into play. Sitting a carton of milk on your tray isn't going to necessarily mean you open it up and consume it if you don't like what's inside. And that is a challenge for all of us, particularly those who are promoting milk, but also the processor. They don't want to have to put out a product that's coming back in a garbage can and any more than any of us do as parents or whatever. So how do we deal with that? Well, then you got this disconnect between who's making the purchase decision, the schools that are budget constrained, or the kids that are looking at what you just put on their tray. And I think we have to realize that the reason why we sell an 8-ounce paper container of milk is because it satisfies the federal requirement. And anything you do that's different from that is going to cost schools more. Plastic containers increase the cost fairly substantially. You put a 10-ounce or a 12-ounce container, obviously it's proportionately higher. Extended shelf life or products that you don't have to refrigerate have a lot of advantages, but generally what you save on refrigeration, you don't make up in terms of the cost of processing. And it becomes just a real difficult proposition for schools that have to choose between how much am I going to spend on the cafeteria versus how much am I going to spend on teaching kids. Another reality for processors is these accounts are pretty darn expensive to serve. Most schools are talking about contracts that have got a lot of language that are not the same as a commercial account. You've got a lot of pressure on getting in a competitive bid. You've got a delivery environment that's usually not very favorable. Depends, of course, from school to school, but backing up your truck to a nice dock you can unload on and moving things out without having to go up and down steps or whatever and having a place to put stuff, is not something you take as a given when you're serving a school account. You've got odd size containers relative to your commercial accounts, and a delivery environment that's kind of challenging. And what we're seeing around the country is fewer and fewer processors are actually interested in serving a market that's shrinking, and it's kind of a clumsy, not so profitable market to begin with. When we think about kids, you can tell a 6-year-old what to drink. I don't know about your family experience, but I found that when my kids got to 16, they didn't just do everything I told them to do. And so I think, there's a point at which, we have to teach kids how to make the right choices, not just tell them what the right choices are. And I think that's where people like Yvonne and Tammy come in, and that's a super important part. And that also means working with parents and working with teachers so that we can help influence what they're providing to students in terms of how do I go about making those right choices. Lastly, Corey, I'm just going to say, okay, so this is what it is, but what should we do? And in my opinion, we're doing a lot of the right things. I think in many ways we just have to keep on what we're doing with the nutrition education, with promotion, with working with schools, with doing the science-based research that's going to help us understand what's going on. All that, I think, is all definitely in the right direction. I think we also need to recognize that a lot of sales, whether it's with schools or just in general, are more and more about trust. About the trust with the producer, which means farmers, the trust with the processor, trust people like Tammy, who, oh, you get paid by dairy farmers and you're telling me to drink milk? Oh, what a coincidence. Am I suspicious about that? Or should I say, no, this is an intelligent person who understands the science. I believe what she's saying. And I think that's something we have to recognize. It's not just saying, well, I was a kid, we did this. Well, that's great. But, that's over now. We got to think about the people that we're dealing with presently. I think we also have to respect our customers. And I think Yvonne is reminding us that customers, consumers, kids don't come from dairy farms, don't have the same frame of reference. We have to speak their language and we have to understand what their concerns are. And with that, Corey, I'll turn it over, and I hope you can get to those questions.
Yep, and we have quite a few questions that came in here. So some of them will have just one of our panelists speak to, but I think the Captain Obvious question comes in here, and we're going to start with this one, and it's going to roll ahead of the ones we were going to talk about. How are children getting milk with schools closed? I think our audience wants to understand that mechanism right now. Yvonne and Tammy, why don't you each talk about that one for 30 seconds?
Yes, so in California, a lot of the schools are either combining together or at individual schools have school feeding sites. So there is just a variety of ways it's happening. It may also be at food pantries. So regionally in the school area, parents, caregivers can come with their kids and pick up school meals on a regular basis. Now, in some cases, they're actually packaging up multiple days worth of meals and giving to families. So in those cases, sometimes we're seeing something different than the 8-ounce container of milk being provided. Sometimes it's a quart, sometimes it's a half gallon. So there's really a variety of ways, but they are still offering meals to children. What we're seeing in California and nationwide, however, is that participation rates have dropped since schools have gone virtual. So this is an area that we really need to, as a dairy industry, focus on. How can we support and promote those school feeding sites and having kids get their meals from those sites?
Yvonne?
And I would add that, with COVID, we're seeing the same thing in the Milwaukee area. But when families did get those stimulus checks, the amount of food that was being purchased at one time and the amount of milk that was being purchased were they were able to get that because they had that extra money, and you had the extra money in the unemployment check. But once that stopped, that's where we were starting to see some changes. And we were very it was quite evident in our area because that people were purchasing the milk because we were starting to see milk shortages on the shelves. And so, that was something that, everybody was really alarmed about because, that hasn't really happened in a long time. So we do know that parents were really taking it to heart and they were purchasing the milk. However, once it started having being a problem, and then Hunger Task Force did get involved, we now see that people are starting to have a little bit more problem. We're having some people who have problems even getting to the food pantries that have milk, because regions do have milk, but the numbers are down. We are starting to look at the idea of having food package deliveries to the homes because of transportation and things, and people not wanting to come out. That has been a problem. But because they did have that extra stimulus money, we were seeing good purchases of milk.
Thank you. And Tammy, you started to answer another question here. You went right to the tip of that. And so we'll address that one real quick. Do you have any knowledge of the percentage reduction that we've seen in school lunches when classes are virtual? Is there some data on that, or is it kind of anecdotal?
I don't have actual data on that. I just do know that there has been a significant decline. We're also then starting to see layoffs with school food service professionals. So there's a ripple effect here. But I don't have that exact number.
Corey, I can tell you that in New York City, the meals delivered to families in the spring declined to about 30% of what would be normal. And I think it varies tremendously district to district, and what the local environment is. New York City had a huge health problem early on and so on, but it was a pretty substantial reduction.
Schools are just really starting to pick back up too. So I would say within a few weeks, we'll start seeing some real solid data on that.
Thank you. We're going to talk about some of the school milk issues here, and we're going to start out with there are trade-offs with chocolate milk and other flavored milks. Kids like the flavor for the most part, and I think we always got to remember the kids are the customers, and it delivers the essential nutrients that we've been talking about. However, there's some concern about its sugar content, and that could lead to maybe a sweet tooth. How do we balance these issues out? Yvonne, maybe you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, dietitians and nutrition professionals always are at two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is that our eating in childhood sets our stage for what we eat as adults. And so when you start looking at the high levels of diabetes and heart disease and obesity, and even childhood obesity, the valuing of changing up how we look at food and sugar and sweet intake, and having that as part of some of the major programs like the Heart Association recommendations, the dietary guidelines and things, really talks about limiting the amount of added sugar in your diet. And so if you're talking about having in a serving of chocolate milk about 11% of your daily intake of sugar or more, it becomes an idea of what are we doing, setting our children up by trying to develop this sweet tooth. The other spectrum, though, is that if you have children who really are not familiar with having just plain white milk, and they will drink the chocolate milk. If you have physical activity wherein they're burning off those extra calories, and that they are having a healthy lifestyle with a healthy plate, that sugar, some people feel it's worth getting that protein and those vitamins and minerals in, and supporting that child and their growth. And that is not going to change the whole tale of their health picture. The other thing is athletic performance. You have some positives of drinking chocolate milk, even though it's not 100% some of the research is very supportive, and some says, well, maybe not so much, but that the sodium and the potassium is at the right amount and help replenishes replenish your muscles and your glycogen store. So there's some positives in it. So from, one sense, some people who really say people should just not eat sugar, till you have the other ones that says the health benefit outweighs the risk. And many times it's the parents and the people at the school level who will be either supportive of it or will say, no, what are you doing? And so, I take the role that what's in the home is going to dictate, but that the children shouldn't, I still feel like they should have the choice.
Tammy?
Yeah, so Yvonne brings up a couple of very good points, and this is why education is so critical. Education for the students as well as the families. Milk and dairy foods are underconsumed. We saw that in your poll earlier, especially with young females and children. Milk and dairy foods pack a powerhouse of essential nutrients, and the amount of sugar, so we have to remember this, the amount of sugar in flavored milk in the school milk is minimal, okay? And the dairy industry has done a great job in innovating over time to bring down the amount of sugar in school milk. So the overall amount of sugar in the children's diets in flavored milk in schools is very minimal, yet it brings a major amount of nutrients to them. And we have to remember that each year, I think more than 31 million children participate in the National School Lunch, and I think around 7 million in the National School Breakfast Program. And a vast majority and even growing number of families are low income, and they rely on those school meals for nourishment for those kids.
Thank you. The next part of this here, and Andy, you articulated this so well in conversations earlier, but there's some of us in the dairy industry who think whole milk and 2% would be the saving, would improve fluid milk sales, and we're getting a lot of questions in like that right now. But there's a lot of things that have to take place before that could even happen, and some of that involves the dietary guidelines. Can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe Tammy wants to add in on that one.
This is me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, I think these are important questions. And again, I would just simply go back to saying there are lots of foods that I like, and lots of foods I don't choose. Somehow, it sort of seems to me like I shouldn't be telling Corey, eat this, don't eat that. That's like Corey's thing to figure out. And personally, if I were God, I would say I think school districts should have pretty much free choice in saying this is how we want to feed our kids, and if they want to pick whole milk at 2%, which I would guess a lot would pick 2%, I'm completely good with that. And I think we really have to sort of balance understanding what it is you think you preferred when you were a kid, or what your kid likes to drink now, versus what makes sense for a community living in a different place in a different environment. And I think it also means, anybody in marketing will say, you got to listen to your customer. I mean, Corey spends a lot of time trying to figure out what dairy farmers want to understand better and put that content in his magazine. He doesn't put in articles about stuff that he just thinks is exciting. He tries to understand our customer, and that's what we have to do across the board. And, I think defending our product and talking about its health benefits, 100%, absolutely, we need to do that. But my feeling is, just like, if you're going to drink milk and you want chocolate, I'm okay with that. If you want to drink milk and it's 2% or 1%, I'm okay with that too, but still milk. So I think we've got to balance, what we believe with what it is that our customer, or maybe more importantly, the guy paying the bill for the school districts, wants to have for their kids. I wish we had looser rules that would allow more local choice.
Tammy or Yvonne?
I just wanted to say, because as a public health person who spent a lot of my life in public health, there's a public health kind of thought on this as well. And one of the issues is the idea that, when you have government programs that you're giving. So say for instance, some low income families get free or reduced meals. They might get free breakfast, free lunch, free, and this idea of is it ethical? And I'm just saying this is what has came up in some of the discussion. Is it ethical to feed children who don't really have that much knowledge about nutrition, foods that that we have a calcium, a calcium crisis, but we have a childhood obesity epidemic, and we have now type 2 diabetes. And so in some of that thought process is saying, do we have an obligation to feed them the healthiest food as possible? And some people feel that feeding them a lower fat milk is healthier to avoid the childhood obesity. Some feel that if it would all balance out if they had the physical activity. So there's some very strong advocates that feel like we, since we are going to be supplying, foods to children who don't have the knowledge, that we should be putting those healthier foods in place. And so some people feel very adamant that we shouldn't be serving whole milk. You did, Andy, point out some of the newer research, though, that is saying that the butterfat in milk products and butterfat in general is not really the cause of the increases in heart disease. Some have been looking at the sugar and looking at the amount of simple carbohydrates and refined foods over time, because when everything went low fat, then the sugar content went up in a lot of different products. And they're finding out the body then created more fat from the sugar. So I just wanted to bring that out, that there are very key advocates that still want to keep the milk kind of low, but then there's other advocates who are saying the research now is not panning out that the fat or butter fat. And that goes along with trans fats in margarines. You see that once that changed, people stopped having so much margarine over butter, and butter is now starting to be the fat. Butter and olive oil, those are starting to have a resurgence again. So like I said, you might see a few things a little different as far as choice as we go forward, as the research the guidelines catches up with the research.
Thank you, Yvonne, and that's why I'm so excited to have you on the program here, because you really don't have a dairy background, but you have a deep nutrition background and really get into people's understanding of what makes them tick, and you're bringing that here on the program. We're going to go to rapid fire here to our panel, because we have lots of questions here, and when we go to rapid fire, we want to try to keep the responses to 30 seconds. First rapid fire is going to go to Tammy. Tammy, you mentioned that schools are applying for a waiver to not serve milk. Are these waivers actually being approved by the state agency and implemented on the local level? How talk about that?
Yeah, I think they're being approved by USDA. They're implemented on a local level. They go through all the way through June of 2021 at this point, is my understanding. Okay,
thank you. Yvonne, this one I'll give you 45 seconds here, and we might do a follow-up. Was USDA's Farm to Families Food Box program the right vehicle to deliver food to families in need during COVID-19? We have WIC, we have SNAP, but let's talk a little bit about what you've learned in Milwaukee on this one, and how hard it is for people to even go get this stuff without a vehicle.
Yeah, I think that COVID presented such problems. And I think that because you had a way to get the farm to family, you had different distribution and different places that were giving that out. People felt more comfortable to go and pick those boxes up and quickly take them away, versus, I don't know what, it cut down on how much time people had to be in the grocery store or trying to do shopping in that kind of way. So it wasn't ideal because of the fact that, you know, we would like people to be able to choose the foods that they are getting versus getting something in a box and everything is just there. But for some people, that was like a very positive thing to be able to pick those boxes up. And a lot of different community agencies were able to be the distributors of those, which people felt comfortable to go to, and that they were able to get that food, and it made a big difference. So it wasn't ideal, but it did help a lot of families, and they were very happy to get that food.
Thank you, Yvonne. We're going to go around the horn on this one. We're going to start with Andy, then Tammy, then Yvonne, and you guys may not have the answer to this, but just talk about it at your local level. Andy representing New York in this question. What percentage of, so there's a lot of competition for the fluid beverage that children drink. So the question is, what percent of schools ban selling soft drinks in cafeteria? Any insight on that from New York?
None whatsoever, but keep in mind they must serve milk with the lunches they serve. And I think a lot of cafeterias allow sales for cash for a variety of other products, including maybe not carbonated beverages, but some kind of alternative. And keep in mind, once you get older, you just go off campus and go buy what you want.
Tammy?
At least in the primary school setting in California, no sale of sodas.
Yvonne?
And the same is true in the Milwaukee area. I was part of the school nutrition policy that went into effect, the committee that developed the school nutrition and policy for students. And the elementary schools had no, it would have no sodas. In the high schools, they would be able to have some soda, but they had to have the healthier items at eye level and at the top, and that only maybe one row at the bottom, so that, you know, that would be running out and stuff. So they looked at how did you position the soda in the vending machine so that it wasn't the top choice. And that seemed to make a difference. They had, you know, put apple juice, they put, you know, more water beverages in there. And then some even put milk machines in.
Thank you,
I will
Yvonne.
want to say one more thing, that in some of the after school programs and some of the community centers, they took out the vending machines altogether. They were going to put in milk machines, but once they took out the vending and nobody worried about it, they just, you know, left it out, and then they did their family meals and they served milk.
Thank you. I'm going to take the next question because I think it relates to all of our poll questions. One of our listeners asked, what is the recommended amount of milk per person per day? And that's 3 a day. That is, there's a little logo and a theme with that, but 3 a day is the answer to that one. Yvonne, we've gotten multiple questions that people want to know your opinion on this one, and they've come in with all different adjectives. So we'll say, what's your view on milk alternatives, nut juices or the imposters? And we were talking a little bit about that, but go ahead.
Right, and I have been in many places. I always tell people that working with individuals and consumer, you have to work from where they're at. And you have to be able to understand why are they making those alternatives. So I have been in places who said, oh, you should never give milk to children. You should only give them almond milk. So you have your almond milk, you have your coconut milk, you now have your soy milk, your pea milk, your pea protein milk, and some other, oat milk. Oat milk is the big one now. And so many times people are in any place that I go, and I'm in a program and I'm working with them, and people start I also bring out that you have to get an equivalence of protein and vitamins and minerals from whatever you give children. Those can drink things that's low protein. And, you know, so coconut milk and almond milk, they don't have enough protein, you know. So if you're substituting that to children, they're not getting the same thing they're getting out of milk. And I point that out to them. And then I, you know, may point them to some of the other things. I try to figure out Why are you staying away from milk? I try to educate them on the benefits of milk. And then I also try to educate them on the different type of alternatives and what could go into, what are you missing out on if you're not getting milk? And so many times it really brings them back to the idea that, well, maybe I should drink some more milk. I'm thinking, I don't try to get them to stop drinking the other beverages. I just try to get them to understand that for their children, they are not getting the same thing that they need for growth and development and for their muscles, and you're not getting the same vitamin A and vitamin D, and so there's a lot of things you're missing out on that you really don't get if you're not drinking milk. And so I'm a milk a proponent, but I also try to meet people where they're at and try to make sure they have make an informed choice versus a limited choice. And one of the big things come up is, oh, milk is loaded with antibiotics. I said, where are you getting that from? Where are you getting that from? And from the people, and from the ones that I know, is that nobody wants to just shoot any animal up with drugs, but that's the image that some people have. And I try to tell them that most farmers care about their animals. They're not going to do that if they're not sick.
As we got about 4 minutes left in the program here, and some kids and adults flat out don't drink milk and substitute other dairy products such as yogurt and cheese. Are these products interchangeable when it comes to delivering nutrients? Tammy, maybe you start out on that one, and then Andy or Yvonne can jump in.
Yes, so I think it goes back to preference and choice, but we're looking for kind of building a good wide basis of preference for milk, yogurt, and cheese. They all give you a great powerhouse of nutrients, calcium, protein. So, something is better than nothing.
What I usually say is that, all of those combinations can get you up to the level of calcium that you need. Because some people only drink milk in their cereal in the morning. Some people say, well, I only get one cup in or one glass in a day. And, to get up to the amount of nutrients you need, like you said, at least 3 to 4 servings. That even teenagers are still laying down calcium and their bones are getting stronger. And, they've had incidents of children who in athletics who've gotten stress fractures because their bones aren't strong enough to support all of the pounding because they're not drinking any milk. And so I really use yogurt, cheese, and fluid milk as part of that whole calcium, amount of calcium to get you into the adequate amount of calcium that all of those can fit. The only thing I'll say about cheese is I promote more natural cheeses. They really are looking at the sodium level that we are having in our cheeses, like the processed cheeses. Is the sodium level starts jumping up. So that would be another area that if they can bring the sodium level down in the processed cheese, that might help, because many children is getting way too much sodium. And some have even gotten high blood pressure as children. We don't even think children get high blood pressure.
Andy, any takeaways from the commission you served on in New York with commission?
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say, I was really interested in how we can encourage, invite, get processors to be more engaged in working with schools, and schools working with processors to make that marketing transaction better. And I think there are some avenues for that, particularly in terms of either schools coming together to do purchasing decisions. And actually, there's an association representing very large school districts across the United States that have exactly that kind of an association, or also smaller customers within a geographic area. So a bunch of schools in a county, or a bunch of schools in a county along with maybe a community college or some other buyers, to try to create a package for purchasing that's more appealing to the processor. And I think basically what we're talking about is a game with a lot of base hits. I don't think there's home runs, but we just got to keep moving people around the base on this problem.
Thank you. And our Dairy Livestream broadcast, next one will take place Tuesday, September 1. It's going to be a Tuesday edition. And I want to thank our guests so much for being part of the program. Yvonne Greer, Why Eat Right, Tammy Anderson Weiss, the Dairy Council of California, and Andy Novakovic, a regular contributor from Cornell University. I am Corey Geiger, your moderator today, and thank you for being on the program and listening today, and have a great day. See you, everyone.
Bye.